literacy in their native culture, but they never achieved a high level of literacy. And then there's students who come to us, they are fully literate in their own language. It just happens to not be a Roman alphabet language, something like Chinese or Arabic. And then there's the students that are already literate in their own language, in French and German and Creole. So they already have some of the same basics that we read left to right, top to bottom. They're familiar with the letter shapes and the different fonts. My primary focus today is going to be on working with non-literate and semi-literate learners. That's primarily who I have spent time working with. We have a large Haitian population, and many of our students are semi-literate. So the first thing really to think about is the level of literacy in their first language does affect their learning to read in a second language. I have a chart here, kind of some of the differences between a literate learner and a non-literate learner, how they tend to learn, what they're able to do. So a literate learner often can distinguish between important ideas and less important ideas. Whereas a non-literate learner, a learner who hasn't been to school, in reading, they may accept all content as being of equal value. The other thing that's interesting is there's often, in terms of looking at any image, any two-dimensional image on a page. So interpreting maps, interpreting charts, graphs, floor plans, this whole idea of interpreting a schematic is, again, more of a challenge for the non-literate learner. So I want to move into a couple demonstrations of how the reading process works. I'm going to show you a slide, and it has, I believe it has 26 letters on it. I'm going to show it for 20 seconds, and during that time I want you to do your best to memorize it. Don't write anything down. And then I'm going to remove it from the screen, and I want you to have a place to jot down as much as you can remember. So I'm going to give us 20 seconds, and here it is. Okay, that was 20 seconds. Take just a minute to jot down all of them that you remember, preferably in order. And now I'll have to ask you how you did. Were you able to remember all 26? Did you get a handful? I myself got about 5 in, and then a lot of letters in the wrong order. So that was not an easy task. I'm going to show you what they were, so you can sort of check in on yourself how you did. And then I'm going to show you the next slide, which is, again, 26 letters. I'm going to show it for even less time, really about 4 seconds, and we're going to do the same thing. Don't write anything down while you're looking at it, and then when I leave the screen, jot down what you remember. That's the 26 letters. So here we go. Okay, take a minute to jot those down. Probably a little better this time. It was the same number of letters. I gave you significantly less time, but I know when I did this myself, I did much better. It was easier for me to remember the 26 letters when they were in meaningful chunks, when they were in those words. So here are those words. You can see if you got all 5, or even just a couple of them. And we're going to do it one more time. I'm going to show you another slide, again, for a very short amount of time, about 3 seconds. And you'll do the same thing. See what you can remember. So here we go. Okay. How'd you do? Why was this one even easier than the last slide? The last slide, all of these words carry meaning. So that was why it was easier than the random string of letters. By the third slide, we're actually putting a schematic to it. So it's a single unit of meaningful text. So you were able to bring your cultural knowledge and your reading knowledge to remember something that you're familiar with, that PTA meeting scheduled tonight at 7 o'clock. Same number of letters again. I show you this to show you the importance of context, relevancy, meaning. As you're learning to read and as a reader, that relevancy and context is going to be so important in keeping you successful, in making you successful. Reading is a really complex process. When I say it's a process, I mean that similar to riding a bike, I can tell you absolutely everything that you need to know about how to ride a bike. Where to put your hands, where to put your feet, you're trying to center your balance, this is how you move your legs. I can tell you everything, but until you do it, you don't learn how to do it. Reading is the same thing. It's a simultaneous process. There's a lot going on all at the same time. So when we look at the reading process, we're talking about some different components. Talking about vocabulary recognition, an understanding of phonics and phonology, the basic language structure, how we put sentences together, the grammar maybe, the prior knowledge that you bring to a text, and I'll show you some of that, and then the cadence, sort of the melody of our voices as we read. So all of these things are combining at the same time for reading to occur. So as a demonstration, I'm going to ask you to read this out loud. I'm sitting in my office talking out loud, so you can sit in your office and talk out loud at your computer. Read this sentence and fill in the blank. The cat climbed up the... If you could use your little hand, how many of you filled in tree at the end of that sentence? Give me a hand raise if you did. All right, a lot of us filled in the word tree. Now I've heard before curtains, I've heard pant legs, but tree tends to be the primary answer. For that is we share that common knowledge. That's what cats do. We share that vocabulary as well. So an English language learner might know in their mind that that's what a cat does. They may visualize the cat climbing the tree. But if you don't have the vocabulary for it, it makes it much harder to read something. So the vocabulary and your knowledge of vocabulary is really important as you're reading. I'm going to show you a difficult vocabulary word here. Except my computer's freezing. Hold on. There we go. Try to say this out loud. See how you can do with it. And I don't even know how to tell you whether you're right or wrong because I don't know how to read this word myself. But I did give it a try. Prevanthisculosis, I think. And I bet many of you said it pretty similarly. Many struggling readers or new readers would see this word and simply ignore it, skip it, pass over it, because it's overwhelming. This is a really long word. As readers, even though it's vocabulary we don't know, we are able to still read it because we have word attack strategies. We know the phonetics of our language and can see chunks of the word that we recognize. So we have some strategies to put the word together, whether we know it or not. I have another sentence here. The Rapjun dringled the bonsig. And I want you to think about who got dringled. The Rapjun dringled the bonsig. Who got dringled? The bonsig. Who did the dringling? And that would be the Rapjun. And I bet you could tell me, did it already happen? So you were able to answer 3 questions about a total nonsense sentence. Just by knowing the language structure of the English language, we were able to add meaning to something that had no meaning. Again, this is something that English language learners are going to have a gap there. They don't necessarily have that same structure in place to build on and to use to make meaning. I'm going to show you one more slide, and I want you to just take a minute to read it to yourself. This is one that I always like to do live because I get to watch people's faces. If you have reacted like people that have attended the training, usually about 3 or 4 lines in, maybe a little further, I start to see people shaking their heads, kind of get this confused expression on their face. This is not an easy text. I am going to give you a little bit of prior knowledge about the text, and I'm going to ask you to read it again. So I'll tell you that this is about Christopher Columbus. Take a minute and read that again. Any better this time? It gets a little bit easier when you have some prior knowledge about it. Still not an easy text, obviously, but with some prior knowledge, you're able to make your way through it a little bit more easily with less frustration. It's amazing how much what you bring to a text, that prior knowledge you bring to a text, affects what you can take away from it, what you can take out of it. With all of you, I just assumed that we share that prior knowledge about Christopher Columbus. Of course, as you know, with adult ed, you can never assume anything. So some of teaching reading is also teaching some of that prior knowledge, giving students enough background about whatever the topic is so that they can be successful. And here's a slide that I'd like you to try to read aloud to yourself, see how you can do. Hopefully some of you made your way through that. We have a Dear John letter here. Dear John, I am sorry to say I must break our engagement. I do not love you. I love your brother, Tom. Oops, sorry, that kind of transferred over a little bit bizarre. Tom, Tim, Ted. Please forgive me. Yours truly. If you were able to get through that, it's pretty incredible. There's not a whole lot of information here. But what we're demonstrating, what you're seeing, is all of those components of reading coming together. Your knowledge, of course, the prior knowledge about a Dear John letter. Your knowledge of phonics, we have some letters there, some beginning sounds. The language structure, we know how to put the sentences together, as well as the structure of a letter in general. The way that it's written, the fact that it has that greeting makes it much easier than if it weren't there. So we're putting a lot of those components to use to be able to read this Dear John letter. We're looking at a very complex process if you haven't picked up on that. So we need to think about, I'm going to move into a little bit, how are we going to teach this complex process, particularly to somebody who's trying to learn English, to learn to speak the language at the same time. So in teaching reading, there's often, I think, a pendulum swing between what's the best way to teach reading. In one camp is using meaning-based techniques, sort of a top-down, holistic view of literacy. And to do that, you're looking at whole words, you're looking at language in context, and you're looking at materials that you're finding in real life. Sort of the opposite side of that pendulum is parts to whole instruction, or kind of bottom up. So the idea that you're starting with the smallest unit, the letter sounds, and building up until you get to an entire text, from letters to syllables to words to sentences. I would argue, and I think this we have found sort of a center spot, that the best way to teach literacy is a combination of both of these, is the integration of them both. To start with the whole language, to identify some of the parts of language, and to go back to the whole language. Students need access to literacy much faster than they can learn all of the sounds, all of the letter combinations, and all of the exceptions. So if we can give them the meaning first, then we can start working on those other skills, the smaller pieces. So we'll start with meaning. I have my students, particularly at the beginning of the year, the first thing they do every time they come in, they see the word name, they write their name. They see the word date, and they write the date. Name and date are two words that they're going to be able to read without even knowing they're reading it. You know, as well as I do, that in addition to teaching reading, we're also teaching communication. So each day I have the students say it out loud, each one individual. My name is, today's date is, and sometimes I'll ask them to orally spell their first name out loud. All of these are benchmarks that we're needing to accomplish along with the reading. A lot of environmental print. To get meaning-based literacy, students are already familiar with these three signs you see here, the restroom, McDonald's, the stop sign. They may not know that that's what the word says, but they already associate meaning with that sign. Then we can break it down and focus on the individual words. We can use those then to learn a little bit of the phonological processing. So I want to start with, like I said, the print that students see every day. The first thing you're going to help students listen for and recognize is the beginning sound of a word. So maybe you decide you want to focus on the S. That stop sign is a great starting point because students know what that means and they know that it means stop. So you can begin with that sound of the S. As a caution, when you're starting to teach those beginning sounds, you want to use the sounds that are consistent. So an M or a B or an S as opposed to the letter G, the letter C, some of the vowels. Once students are able to distinguish beginning sounds, you can move on to recognizing the ending sound and the middle sounds as well. At the beginning, we just want them to focus on that beginning sound. You might have them see a larger text, but just go through and look for all the words that start with B, maybe, and then read those words for them so they can pick up on that constant sound that B says B. I like to use these as a warm-up, alphabet cards. You can use index cards. I actually just use old file folders, cut those apart. So on one side, I give the students the card, the letter B. I like to start right from the beginning with the capital and the lowercase together because I want the students to learn that those are equivalent. And so I would start with the B, and I would hold up some pictures of familiar vocabulary and elicit the students to say those words. As we say them, they're starting with B, the B. I'll point that out every time. So a student says book. Good, book. B, and I'd write the B and then the O, OK on the board. And I have each student make their own individual alphabet card. Then I ask them on the back side to pick one of those words that's going to be sort of their keyword, so that when they come to a word that they don't know, but they see it starts with a B, they will have in their mind B, book, B, and they know where to start. I usually just do one letter card a day, and it makes a great warm-up as students are coming in to go through their alphabet cards. And I would say it just like that, B, B, book, and go through them that way. As the students are learning the letter sounds, another great activity, warm-up activity, I don't know if you've ever seen the game Scattergories, but there's a large die with all the letters of the alphabet on it. So to have the students roll the die, whatever letter lands on top, say that sound, or come up with a word that begins with that sound is a good review. You can also work with students on word families. So recognizing some of those word endings. I recently did this with a low-level literacy group, and I was really surprised at how difficult it was to just simply switch out that first sound. Students could tell me the sound of the letter, and they could tell me the word bat, but when I put that C in front, they knew C says k, but they really had a difficult time putting that together to say cat. So this, again, is a great warm-up. You can do it with individual letter tiles. I create my own letter tiles, again, with those old file folders, to demonstrate how we manipulate sounds, how we change the beginning sound to make a new word. And of course, as students get more advanced, you go to harder word families like that IGHT. And you can also start working in some of the blends, the TR or the ST at the beginning of the words, or the digraphs, the CH, the PH. But this, again, is just going to take a lot of repetition. Ideally, these word families, these letters, these words that you're pulling, are starting in meaning. So you're taking these words out of a text that carries meaning. In every class session, even with a non-reader, I want to make sure there is some reading being accomplished, actual reading. Maybe just a read aloud, but some reading. So we have lots of options. What is it that we are reading? Of course, there are a lot of great publishers, a lot of great text out there. I have a few here that I've used, the Active Reader from New Readers Press, Laubach, Voyager, and of course just whatever textbooks you're using in your school. Even better, though, I think, is that real-world text. A menu, a letter from the school home, even the newspaper, a receipt, helping them identify the total. They don't have to be able to read every word on it, but just to see that this text is carrying meaning. I've used a newspaper and asked them, just a newspaper article, to circle any word they see that starts with R, or circle any word you see that's in that IGHT family. Keep in mind that the circling, highlighting, underlining, all of that is actually part of literacy. So if you want your students to circle all of the T's in the text, you need to demonstrate on the board what that means to draw a circle, or what that means to underline, so that they can be successful with that. I want to pause here and just see, did anyone have any questions so far for me about what I've covered? If you have a question, take a minute to type it in before we get moving on. I'm watching my question box here. And I know, I think the best thing about teaching is stealing ideas from other people. So after the webinar is over, I'd love to hear some of the strategies that have been successful for you. You did see my email address, so I'd love it if you would forward some of those after. Okay, it doesn't look like I have any questions coming in. I'll pause again in a little bit if there are any more that pop up. So in addition to these texts that you're looking at here, my favorite text to use is one that the students generate. Many of you are probably familiar with the language experience story or language experience approach, where the student or students tell you a story or explain an experience. I know a teacher who brought in peanut butter, jelly, bread, made a peanut butter sandwich with the class, and then had the class retell the steps to make the peanut butter sandwich, and that was their language experience story. They're great because the students dictate them to you, so they see their own words that they've spoken matched to print, and they're already engaged in the text, so then you can use that text to break it down to that parts, the letters, the words, the phonics, the sentences. And then you can use that same text to go even further with it. What I love about this language experience story is that you don't have to be concerned at all with vocabulary. If it's the text, if the words have come from the student, then they are all words that are in the student's vocabulary. I have this website down at the bottom, Literacy Do page. I'm going to show you briefly, there's a YouTube video of a tutor doing a language experience story with his student. It's one-on-one, but you can also do it as a class. I also want to point out this website, though, because Literacy Do page, if you are a tutor trainer, has a lot of great videos that you can share with your tutors. So I'm going to see if I can do this. Escape out of that and play the story. I'm not sure. I think the sound should work through your computer, but it will probably be slightly delayed. I'm not sure how this will go. So,
during a conversation, the tutor and learner discussed the learner's busy day. It involved a child's illness, which required the learner to call her employer and explain why she wouldn't be coming into work the next day. The experience story strategy flows quite naturally from this conversation and can be used to strengthen the learner's skills.
Katie, earlier you were telling me about Johnny, and he was sick today. And it sounds like you've had a very busy day today and a lot on your mind. Why don't we write your story down, and then we can use that for our lesson, okay? And maybe, you know, I have a pad here that you could write it down on. You're afraid of that. Okay, not a problem. No, that's fine. I'll write it for you, and then we'll look at it afterwards. Okay? How does that sound? Does that sound like a good idea? Okay, good. Okay, why don't you tell me the story then?
My son Johnny this morning went to school in the middle of the school. Some nurse called my husband like him.
Okay, can you just slow down just a little bit? So in the middle of school, the school nurse called. Your husband.
But like him come to school, take Johnny to home because he had a fever.
Okay. He had a fever?
Yeah.
Because he had a fever. Okay. Now, what's going to happen tomorrow, do you think? I mean, I know you go to work during the day. What do you think will happen? Okay, well, let me read the story back, and we'll see if there's any changes that you'd like to make. Okay, Katie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. My son, Johnny, this morning went to school. But in the middle of school, the school nurse called my husband and let him take Johnny to home because he had a fever. Tomorrow, Johnny still needs at home.
Excuse me.
Yeah, sure.
Can I make a change?
Yes, sure. Yeah, where would you like to make a change?
I want to say tomorrow, Johnny still needs to and home.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Okay. No, here, let's look at this again. You want to say tomorrow, Johnny still needs to be at home? Still needs to... Oh, to stay. Oh, yeah, okay, very good. Let's put in to stay. Okay, good. Okay.
To stay at home
And I will need school.
I will
need to call. I will need call school.
Change a little.
Yes, sure, yeah.
I will need to call.
Okay, very good. Yes, we need to put 2 in there. We need to call school.
Cool.
Okay, and then Johnny will take 1 day off. Also, I need to call my boss, take 1 day off. Okay? Okay. Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay, Katie, now it's time for you to read it. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, sure.
My son, Johnny, this morning went to school, but in the middle of school, the school nurse called my husband and let him take Johnny to home.
I'm going to go ahead and stop that there. I think you get the idea of it. This obviously was a pretty high-level learner. If you're working with a low-level literacy class, it does not necessarily have to be a long text. Your text might be a simple sentence. Today is hot, or today is hot and sunny. So it wouldn't have to be that long, but the point is that it's the student's words. I see a question over here that's a great question about having the student write their story or write the story in their own language and then helping them identify some cognates. I have never done that before, but I do like the idea if you have students who are literate enough in their own language to be able to write in that language. And I think it probably would also help if you spoke whatever their first language is, but that would definitely be an option. I've seen language experience stories done 2 ways. So the way that the tutor and Katie just did it, he wrote down her exact words, including any grammar errors. He let them go, and then they came back to the text those together. With high-level learners, I think that's really, really effective. I tend to think with the low-level learners that I have a better time fixing those grammar errors so that when they are reading that same text over and over again, I'm reinforcing correct grammar too. So for example, if the sentence that we dictate, that we create together is today is hot, but they say today hot, I would still go ahead and add the is for that. But again, once you have this text, that's the whole piece, then you can go to the parts. So you can use sentences from that text and cut them apart and have students put them back in order. If your sentence, today is hot, you might simply ask a low-level student to pick the word that says hot. Whereas a more advanced student could put those words in order, cut the sentence apart and put it in order. I love to use those sentence strips. I also have seen, and I think it's a really cute idea, somebody use a fly swatter race. So taking that text, picking some key vocabulary or sight words from the text that they've used, and putting a bunch on the board, a bunch of those words on the board, and then having it be a race between 2 students. So each student gets the fly swatter, and the teacher, or it could be another classmate, says one of the words on the board. And whoever hits it first with their fly swatter, wins that round. Just something fun to help them get that quick recall of words, that quick recognition. Another way to generate text, of course, it can be from an experience. It can also be from picture stories. There's a lot of picture stories in various texts. This comes from the Future English for Results. But remember that even interpreting pictures is a learned skill, is part of literacy. So this might start very simply. You might start with a think aloud, or you might even start just with a simple picture card. You know, a man, he is sad, or he is happy. Something very simple to help them get in the practice of using pictures to make meaning. With a little bit higher level class, I've done this, this picture story with a partner. They just answer each of the questions to create the story. You can do it as a whole class as well. Or again, various options. For this one, reading the pictures, I've had students, we look at all the pictures together without the text there and talk about what's happening. It's a wedding. And you can start to elicit some vocabulary. What do you see at a wedding? The wedding gown. Where are they standing? They're standing in front of the fireplace. So I would go through all the pictures first and then add the text for those higher level learners. Or you wouldn't have to use the text that's provided. The students could write their own text, and again, you have the idea of a language experience story. And we know that all the vocabulary that they're writing or that you're writing is known vocabulary. So they're not having to focus on vocabulary and the reading process at the same time. That's not always the case. I have a little story here for you. Jan bought a new stecker at the hardware store. She needed a stecker for her minkle. Everybody knows that a minkle won't dreep if it doesn't have a good stecker. Take a look over at my comprehension questions here on the right. Can you tell me, what did Jan buy? Well, she bought a new stecker. What did she need it for? Her minkle. And what would have happened if Jan hadn't bought it? Well, her minkle wouldn't dreep. We can answer all of these questions, but do you know what we just read? Do you understand it? Remember, the whole purpose of reading in general is to comprehend. I have never finished a book and said, wow, what a great group of words. The whole point of reading is to understand. Part of that is knowing the vocabulary. Oftentimes, it's a good idea to pre-teach some of the vocabulary before you ever start reading. So to pre-teach the vocabulary, rather than just giving it to the students, I often like to brainstorm with the students. So if I'm going to read Miguel's Job, and again, this could be with the lowest level class, and maybe all they're doing as I'm reading is pointing to each word and showing that they have voice to print match, versus higher level students who maybe would be able to read the text along with me. But so if I'm going to read this, I'm going to start with the picture, and I'm going to give them a little bit of background maybe about the picture. So we're going to read about a painter. And I would ask the students, have you ever painted? What have you painted? What tools do you use? So I'm eliciting this vocabulary with brush is in the story. I might mime or act out using a roller to paint. So giving some of these vocabulary words, whether it's eliciting because it's vocabulary they already know and I want to bring it to the forefront of their mind, or it might be that I am teaching it, but now they have something to match it onto. Obviously, a picture speaks 1,000 words. If you have some vocabulary that you can show a picture for students to understand, that's a very easy way to do it. And then, of course, always within a context for students to come back to. So now a little bit more about how so this text, Miguel's Job, how are we going to read it, or maybe something simpler? What are we going to do with it? I have a couple different options up here. although I wouldn't even necessarily call them options. You could do all of them for the same text because that repetition is so, so important for beginning readers. I often like to start with students listening for comprehension first. I don't even give them the text yet because I don't want them to become overwhelmed by the words and the text. I want them to simply get an idea of the story. You remember from the Christopher Columbus slide, the more you know going into something, the more you know before you read it, the easier it is to read. So just listening first is already making the students familiar with the story and the vocabulary in the story. After listening, just listening, I might pass it out and have the students follow along while I read aloud again. Maybe if I'm working on voice to print match, students are just pointing at each word, just to show that they can follow along. I might do modeled reading, which would be taking a small part at a time. I would read it out loud and then have the students read it out loud right after me. Paired reading works well, pairing them up with a partner. Or you can do some independent reading. I would say typically independent reading with that lowest level learner is not very effective. But as you get a little bit higher, that independent reading time gives them an opportunity to see where they're struggling. You might use one text in the most basic class. You might use one text for an entire week and each day do something a little bit different with it. And during that reading time, we're modeling some comprehension strategies. We're telling them what we do as a reader, so verbalizing what's happening. Making predictions. So with that Miguel story, I would say, I see the picture. It looks like he has a bucket and a brush. I bet he's a painter. I wonder if he paints pictures or the house, inside or outside. I'm basically verbalizing any thoughts I have to show them what reading is about. I'm also going to demonstrate my ongoing comprehension. If I notice there's something I think might be challenging for the students, I might, stop and say, I didn't quite understand that. I better read it again. So all of this is simply modeling, like you do with a beginning reader as a child, whether it's their first language or not. So during reading, there's still some conversation happening. And then after reading, same thing, helping them do what readers do. Skimming and scanning for information, particularly if you have to give tests to your students, leveling tests. The ability to skim or scan a text for particular pieces of information is really important if the test is timed. Asking a question and having the students find it in the text. I like to use highlighters and have the students actually highlight the part of the text that answers the question. And now, of course, we're talking a little bit higher level. At a lower level, I might ask them to highlight a particular word or to find a particular sentence. And then having them retell the story back to you is another sort of follow-up. I know in adult ed, our classes are never simply just one level. Even if we have the literacy level class or the low beginner class, there's always some variation in what the adults can do in reading, speaking, writing, and listening. So after you read, or as you're reading, to be able to ask questions that everyone can answer. So you reach your lowest level students with simple yes or no questions. Is Miguel a painter? That's a question that even your lowest level student can answer. I like to use, I just use construction paper. I have a square of green construction paper that says yes, and a square of red construction paper that says no. And I'll ask a yes or no question, and each student will hold up either their yes card or their no card. It's a way for them to answer, but it also is reinforcing those two words, what those mean and how they're written. If you want to go to a little bit higher level, reach some of your higher level students, but still not very advanced, you can give some choices. So is Miguel's job easy or difficult? And then for the top students in your class, or maybe the ones with the best speaking capabilities, you can ask for those short answer questions. So you're getting everybody involved on some level, even if they weren't able to read the text, or even if they don't have the proficiency to speak and give you a full phrase or a full sentence. You might, on another day, like I said, use that same text, and maybe this time you do a cloze reading with the students. If you're familiar with cloze, basically you are taking out words from the text, replacing it with a blank space, for the students to then fill in. You can use it with various concepts. If you want to focus on vocabulary, you take out some key vocabulary words. If you want to focus on grammar, maybe you take out some of the verbs and have them fill in the correct form of the verb. If you want to focus on simple letter sounds, I might not take out the whole word. I might take out just that beginning letter of the word and have them fill in those initial sounds. Again, you can modify this. So for the lowest level students, in addition to maybe just having them fill in a letter, you can give them a word bank. So they just have to decide which word goes where. Versus higher level students that have to really think a lot more and think about what makes sense to put into the text. Same story, maybe another day, maybe the same day. You can do some sequencing activities. So this is just an example. I would have these 4 pieces from the Miguel story, Miguel's job. Sentences from the story, but mixed up order. Again, I like to put them on sentence strips, and then have the class put them in the correct order. I learned that you can do this many, many, many different ways. So you could do it as a whole class, putting it together. You could have partners work together to put them in order. To get students up and moving, you might give each student a sentence from the story, and they have to stand up and stand in the correct order from the story. I did something similar to this recently with a very low-level class, and when I asked them to put them in order, they were able to pull the sentences in the correct order. They knew the order of the story, but interestingly, when they lined them up to show the order, they did not put them top to bottom or left to right. So that was something kind of eye-opening for me, that if I want them to put them in order how I think top to bottom, I started drawing squares on the board with number 1, the square at the top, number 2, the next square, so that they get in that habit of sequencing visually as well. Another strategy that I want to share with you that I saw when I went to an English Forward training with the Literacy Coalition of Central Texas was the use of PowerPoint in teaching reading. Of course, it wouldn't have to be PowerPoint. It could be printed on pieces of paper. But if you wanted to do PowerPoint, I thought it was a pretty clever idea. So you do some of the same things, some pre-reading before you ever start. We're going to read a story about driving. That's my car. What color is it? What do you see in that bottom corner? Who is that person? Right? So you're eliciting some vocabulary. You're activating prior knowledge. What do you do if you get pulled over? What could you get pulled over for? So you're getting some discussion going as much as possible. And then I'm going to start reading and instruct the students to look at the pictures or follow along. So I'll go ahead and go through this with you. My car. This is my car. I am a good driver. A stop sign. I always come to a complete stop, and I always look both ways. And meanwhile, as you're reading this aloud, you're demonstrating. You're making the physical movements. So you show how you look to the left and you look to the right. You look both ways. A traffic light. I always stop at a red light. I never run a yellow light. Well, sometimes I run a yellow light if I'm late to work. Run a yellow light. One time I ran a yellow light when I was late for work. Getting pulled over. A police officer was there. He pulled me over for running the yellow light. License and registration. The police officer asked to see my license and registration. Then he gave me a ticket. Okay, so I might go through this a couple times with the students, so they're getting the image, they're seeing the text, multiple times going through. And then what? Well, we can have some discussion about it. I always like to ask the students, what do you think will happen next? Or maybe having them share their own experience. That's probably something a lot of them have experienced. You can also do sequencing activities with that, putting the pictures in the order of the story. At the lower level, I can go through it with them. I can show them each slide, and they find the correct picture. You can do matching pictures to the text. So cut the text off from the picture and have the students match those up. For those lower level students, maybe all you're matching is the title of the slide. So maybe they're not matching the sentence, but they're just matching license and registration. For the higher level students, you can have them match the sentence. Again, if you want to get your students up and moving, you could give half your class, give each of them a picture, and half your class give each of them the sentences, and then they have to find their partner who has the text that matches the picture. And then you can, again, take it down to the parts. So maybe in this story, I would find the IGHT words, light, night, and work together to come up with other words in that word family. I'm seeing a question here. Let's see. I lost the audio, but I see the slides. I'm going to let Nicole take a look at that one. I'm sorry that you can't hear me. Hopefully that gets worked out. So the idea being that everything we do is within a context. We can take a whole text, break it down to the smaller parts, and then take it back to the whole. I want to take a minute again if you have any questions or something that you were hoping to get today that I didn't address. So I'll give you a minute to type those in if you have any. Okay, it doesn't look like it. Again, if you'd like to type in any strategies you've used, feel free to do that. And if you have any useful websites or texts that you particularly like to use, you can add some of those in as well. I think, like I said before, sharing our strategies is the best way to become better teachers. So any of those that you want to email me and maybe I can get them to Nicole and send back all around would be great. The two handouts, you have my PowerPoint as well as I attached a sample lesson plan for a low-level literacy class to give you an idea of what it might look like for a full 2 hours or for a full hour and a half. And with that, I will just say thank you so much for your time. I know middle of the afternoon is not always easy. And I'll ask Nicole to come back and take back over.
Thank you, Megan. Okay, I did have a question about downloading the handouts. If you go to the handouts section on your control panel, you'll see a little plus button to the left of it. Just click that, and you should see both handouts in a clickable link. and you just go ahead and click those and it'll automatically start downloading. If you're having trouble with it, or if it didn't download, just email me and I can give that to you. Let's see. And I think that's good. I think that's going to be it for the questions. All right, so thank you all so much for attending. I think that's going to be it for today. As you leave this webinar, there's going to be a short survey. Please take it. It's 11 questions. If you want the certificate of attendance, you have to fill this survey out. So just don't forget to fill that out. Thank you very much, and I'll be in contact via email if anyone has any additional questions. Okay, thank you very much.